Welcome to Reality Gospel Channel. Please click, share, like, and subscribe. Thank you.
The second law that governs creation is the law of the will of God. The wisdom of God is the how of God, but the will of God is the what of God. You know, Jesus revealed to us the meaning of worship. You know, in the realms of heaven, Lucifer did not read the lexicon of God properly. He thought worship was a good song, and because he could sing, he called himself a worshiper. When Jesus came, Jesus redefined worship. That worship is not a song. Worship is the ability to stay in the center of God's will. So the loudest, the best worship that God has ever heard was in Gethsemane. There was no microphone there. He said, the flesh is weak, but the spirit is willing. He said, Father, if it were possible, take this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine. That's the summary of worship. The summary of worship is the ability to discern the will of God and to stay there. The reason is because the will of God is what holds creation together. If the will of God is withdrawn from creation, creation will collapse. Creation will lose essence. Creation will no longer be viable in the hand of God, and God will no longer have need for creation. That is why I said at the end of time, when the will of God is accomplished, he said the elements of this world will melt. Because I'm not interested in the buildings. The buildings will be relevant to the degree that they satisfy my will. But when my will is accomplished in time, I will cause the entire universe to melt. And in the realm of God, there is no depletion of value. His name is called El Shaddai. So he has more than enough. So even if the earth melts, he said a new Jerusalem will appear from heaven. The same way Eden descended from heaven, that's how the new earth will descend. There is no scarcity in that realm. So when my will is no longer there, even if the place is beautiful, it will melt. And so when creation discerned that the second law that governs the existence of creation is the law of the will of God, everybody will not say he is living or is alive until he has found the will of God for his life. And the will of God is not a one time or a one moment reality. Every aspect of your life, there is a will of God that must be found. This is what makes journeying in life a patient walk. Because many times you can run, but the will of God may not yet have been isolated. That you got married does not make it a testimony. What makes it a testimony is whether that marriage is the will of God. So you don't get married because you are 30. Don't get married because you are 35. You get married because now you have seen the will of God and you know it. The moment you isolate the will of God, your marriage is a blessing. Even if it was contracted at 35, childbearing won't be a problem, because when you are in the will of God, you are in Eden. The reason men struggle is because they are outside the will of God. There is a place where you don't need to pray for things. There is a place where everything you need is added to you. That is the center of God's will. The reason most of our prayer points are many is because we are outside of God's will. When you come to the center of God's will, many prayers will not be necessary. Because before you came there, it was supplied. That's why the fish will never know how to pray for water. Because it's in the middle of water. The day the fish begins to pray for water, that means the fish is outside of his ecosystem. There are many things we pray about that would not have been necessary. The reason those prayers are necessary is because we are not in the center of God's will. So the labor of a man is to isolate the will of God for his life. You can be a preacher and be outside of God's will. I'm not trying to make a spiritual statement, even though it's very spiritual. You can be a businessman and be more in the center of God's will than an apostle. Because it's not about the office. It's about the discerning eye that knows what was uttered concerning you before you were born. Because before you came, God had already gone into the studio. He took note of everything you will need. Most times we pray and it looks as if we are persuading God, because we think God, we know the need more than God. Meanwhile, before you started praying, God planned everything for your destiny before you came. He is 1,000 times more meticulous than you. Because he said, before you were formed in your mother's womb, I knew you. I sanctified you. I ordained you to be a prophet. Everything you ever need was already released. But the problem is that those things were put on the path of destiny. And so God expects you to trace that path. If you know it, every station you get to, what you need will be waiting for you there. But when you dislocate, you will now begin to persuade God to get that thing that you need in Abuja, but you are in Lagos, to meet you in Lagos. That's where you have a problem, trying to exercise your faith and labor. If you came to Abuja, you will discover that there's a technology that orders the step of the righteous. And when God orders your step, he doesn't know how to order you into lack. He orders you into abundance, because everything you ever needed was prepared before you came. So the second law that governs the civilization of man is the law of the will of God. If you have not discerned the will of God for your life, you are at risk. Your existence is at risk. You will need the mercy of men. You will need to beg, and you will labor with uncertainty at different junctions of your life. But a man who is walking in the will of God is in a cruise mode. Jesus knew he was in the will of God. So even when the boat entered a turbulence, he was sleeping. You know, men don't sleep in a turbulent boat. Only the man who is in the center of God's will. Because it's either the wind comes or he will walk on water. I don't know which one. It's either the wind comes or I will walk on water. Because so long as I'm in God's will, I can't be destroyed. The will of God becomes an insurance policy. When you go to religious places, people are fasting every day, hoping that they will survive. Those are babes. When men grow, they know that the jealousy of God is invested on their lives. They don't know how to perish. They don't know how to faint. Because before they came, God went ahead of them. That was how David fought his war. Before David went to battle, he consulted with the Urim and the Thummim. And the Bible said, when you see the mulberry tree move, I've gone ahead of you. David can go to war with stone, he will win. If you like, come with the best armor. If David comes with stones, he will win. The reason is because God has gone ahead. So it is not the kind of weapon you have that gives you victory. It's where you are standing. The second law that governs man's existence is the code and the law of the will of God.